video of Ferguson police gassing a news crew and dismantling their equipment. I don't know if you guys have seen this one yet. It was posted yesterday.
I have not.
Boing,
No, I haven't
Boing.
either.
Yeah, so boingboing.net, there's, of course, a lot of news there in Ferguson, and the media is not something the police tend to like having around when they're engaging in their police state tactics of harming people, shooting protesters, and doing all manner of who knows what. And, of course, a lot of cases, some of the more violent protesters turn out to be police officers who are undercover in the crowd. Those are called agents provocateur, and their game is to basically whip people up and try to get people to become violent.
So is this proven that there's actually agent provocateur in the crowds, or is this just speculation?
I haven't seen that yet on this particular episode of police violence, but there have been plenty of episodes in the past at various locations where there absolutely have been, real hard evidence that certain people, certain protesters with quotes around them, were actually police officers undercover. There was one, I forget which, it was like the Republican National Convention or something like that, where basically there were protesters who were still wearing the jack boots that the police would have been wearing, that were the ones that were causing, like they were wearing the exact same model of boots that some of the other police, so they were undercover wearing the same boots, whereas the police were wearing uniforms with those boots. So there was some, and they were the ones that were causing the trouble. They were the ones stirring up the crowd. So there have been instances like that where it's been pretty crystal clear that stuff like that has gone on. In this case, you've got one news crew filming as another news crew is shot at in the streets of Ferguson. They are shot with some sort of a tear gas device, and you can hear at one point they've actually bleeped out the cursing. There's not much to really hear. It's just footage from across the road where you've got a news crew of about 3 people. They've got lights. They've got cameras set up. They were doing a report. The police literally shot a can of tear gas right in the midst of the report. The news crew runs off, and then a few moments later in the video, the Bearcat pulls up next to the news crew's van. And then a crew comes out. One guy's got his gun. He's aiming it around. He's giving cover to the 2 other police officers as they take down the lights and take the camera that's on the tripod still. Because, again, the news crew ran away. They left a $50,000 camera right there on this tripod. So they then take the camera and point it downward at the ground. It's just all as there's this guy standing there, a police officer with a machine gun pointing it around like they're about to get jumped by some crew of
by a
dangerous
news
people.
crew.
Yeah.
Right. So how did the guy who's videotaping this incident get away with it then? I feel like they would have gone after him too.
Yeah, well, for all I know, they did go after him. I actually haven't taken the time to watch the full 5-minute-long video here.
I mean, luckily the video made it online before anything happened.
That's why it's so important to have multiple people with cameras around in situations like this. So there's only so much covering up that the police can do, and as they continue to cover up, it'll look worse and worse for them. There's news here also about other news reporters being arrested. This one came out of DCist.com, summing up the stories from the Washington Post and Huffington Post. 2 reporters were arrested, one from each organization, on Wednesday evening, covering the ongoing protests in Ferguson over the death of the 18-year-old Michael Brown, who was killed by a local police officer over the weekend. Frustrations in the Ferguson community boiled over as the police refused to provide the public with any details about Brown's death. Their poor handling of the situation has led to a string of heavy protests, which quickly turned violent as police responded with tear gas and other riot gear. Wesley Lowry, reporter with the it's actually not made clear, the Post. We're talking about
Lowry's from the Washington Post, and Ryan Riley is from
the Huffington
HuffPost.
Post. He recounts the ordeal, writing that he and the Huffington Post reporter were camped out in a McDonald's a few blocks from Brown's shooting, which had become kind of a makeshift staging area for reporters to gather and work. Lowry writes that while he and Riley were working at the McDonald's, many armed officers came into the establishment and confronted the pair, asking for their identification. Lowry, who was wearing his press lanyard, said he overheard Riley ask why they had to show ID, to which they didn't press the point, but one added that if they called 911, no one would answer. The police then left, only to come back moments later telling everyone they had to leave. That's when Lowry began recording the incident on his phone. Lowry writes as he was asked to stop recording and was forced to gather his things and leave. As he was leaving, he says he was given conflicting reports as to which way he should exit, which led to the circumstances of his arrest. Go another way, he said. As I turned, my backpack, which was slung over one shoulder, began to slip. I said, "Officers, let me just gather my bag." As I did, one of them said, "Okay, let's take him." Multiple officers grabbed me. I tried to turn my back to them to assist them in arresting me. I dropped the things from my hands. He said, "My hands are behind my back. I'm not resisting. I'm not resisting." At which point one officer said,
"Quit resisting."
"Yes, you're resisting. Stop resisting." That was when I was most afraid, he said, more afraid than of the tear gas and the rubber bullets. And this is a typical tactic by
police. And I believe
police.
it was the other reporter was actually able to send text messages, or rather Twitter messages, during the arrest.
Oh, really?
Because I've seen the picture. There was a picture that was tweeted out, and then a couple of messages were tweeted. Just got arrested. So did this other guy.
This is a typical tactic by police to claim that an individual who is being arrested is resisting the arrest. It's very difficult to prove that you weren't resisting arrest, especially if there's no video footage around. And they did say he was forced to stop recording, so I don't know if footage exists of the arrest. I haven't, again, dug in. There's just so much information here.
Well, how can they even justify it if they're just telling them to leave a public area without any specific reason?
Well, that's a great point. Clearly, the reason was to bust up the area where the reporters were hanging out. I mean, that seems what they were doing. They were
recharging their cell phones and laptops.
Right, and probably getting online. I mean, McDonald's usually has a free Wi-Fi for folks. There's more coming up here. 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733. So they figured they'd go in there and bust up the reporter convention and, throw them out on the streets and keep them moving around. More on the way here. This is Free Talk Live. You can share with us your thoughts on Ferguson, Missouri, the police state there. There's a little bit of audio as one reporter from the Huffington Post as well as another from the Washington Post were being kicked out of a McDonald's, apparently along with everybody else in there. Got a man in fatigues.
Let's go. We don't have time to ask questions. Let's go.
Helmet.
You can move your car if your car's out here. Let's go.
It is. That's what I was asking. You didn't have time to answer?
Let's go. Let's go.
Was this man being shoved out of the McDonald's and then ultimately arrested because he didn't go in the direction they wanted him to go or something like that? He didn't go as fast as they wanted him to go. As you can see, he's trying to gather his things in the video while this man in fatigues is getting up in his face telling him, "Let's go, let's go." Were they trying to clear the McDonald's because there had been a bomb threat? Was there an imminent danger to the folks that were in there enjoying themselves a meal or a little bit of free Wi-Fi access? There were a lot of apparently reporters in there. Nope, wasn't anything like that.
There's no reason given, was there?
We don't see the full scene. It was after the police had already come in, like some sort of a team of cops in fatigues came into this restaurant and immediately started to demand that people leave. So I'm not sure if a reason was given at some point before the camera was turned on.
Let's go. There's a door over here. Let's go.
So shortly after this, now, they're not shouting at the top of their lungs, but certainly a sense of urgency. This guy's getting right up real close to him, and then he was arrested as well as the other guy. So 2 reporters arrested at this same incident. Several armed officers in the establishment. We'll continue with more information about this. So more of the reporters here, DCist.com, sort of summing up 2 stories from the Washington Post and the Huffington Post, with both of these reporters being arrested, likely for the first time. It can be a real shocker when you're arrested the first time, and especially when you're a member of the press doing your job. It's your job to report on something that's going on, and because you're doing your job, in this case, you're targeted by the police, and it can be a really scary situation.
Right, especially when you're a press member and you're used to being allowed to film things like this.
Exactly.
Like if there's ever an event that's going on, one of the first people you see there, but besides the police, is the press. And they're standing on the sideline videotaping whatever's going on, but it seems like the police just really didn't want that to get out. Why else would they chase them away?
So a little bit more here from the story. Both Lowry and Riley, the press, were arrested and led into a police van where Lowry describes a large man in there screaming in that he couldn't breathe and he was going to die. The police didn't do anything about it. While Lowry and Riley were briefly detained, Lowry writes they were only told they were being detained for trespassing in a McDonald's and was denied to see an arrest report, wasn't given any badge numbers or names when asked. Riley says they weren't even read their Miranda rights, which, by the way, the legality of Miranda rights, as I understand it, is they only have to read them to you if they're going to question you.
Yes.
So if they're just arresting you to put you in a police van to take you to the police station where they then release you with no charges, and that's what I've heard happened here. I'm not sure if they did or did not charge them. I'm not real clear on that. But if they just release you with no charges, then there's no Miranda rights that need to be read. More from the story here. Let's see. Washington Post editor Marty Barron issued the following statement in light of the incident. Wesley has briefed us on what occurred, and there was absolutely no justification for his arrest. He was illegally instructed to stop taking video of officers. Yep, that's absolutely true. Then he followed officers' instructions to leave a McDonald's after contradictory instructions on how to exit, he was slammed against a soda machine and then handcuffed. That behavior was wholly unwarranted and an assault on the freedom of the press to cover the news. The physical risk to Wesley himself is obvious and outrageous. After being placed in a holding cell, he was released with no charges, as I thought, and no explanation. He was denied information about the names and badge numbers of those who arrested him. We're relieved that Wesley is going to be okay, and we're appalled by the conduct of police officers involved. I'm not appalled.
That is very appalling. No, I think it's terrible that, like, you know, even if he was arrested and, let go without any charges, he should at least be able to get the information of the officers. Like, I thought that was a right, especially since they're
Ellen,
civil servants.
Look at you using logic. Like, logic doesn't come into play when you're talking about government officials. If logic came into play, he never would have been arrested in the first place.
Well, if there are no charges, then does there have to be a report filed for an arrest? Is there an arrest report on someone who they kidnap, put in handcuffs, and sort of go through the motions of your being arrested, but ultimately if you don't get a charge, if they don't hand you that, pink slip or whatever the color is where you happen to live, they don't hand you that complaint, which has some sort of statute written out on it with your name and information, where's the arrest report? Do they even have to file one?
There will not be I don't think there will be an arrest report, but there has to be some kind of police log.
Some kind of incident report?
Of, like, what did you do for the last 3 hours of your shift?
I mean, I don't know
when
about
I was
that.
a security guard, I had to put down.
That's a private company.
Right, but, I'm just thinking, private security, I had to document, this is everything I did throughout my shift, and if times didn't match up. So what were you doing for, an hour and a half? You have an hour and a half unaccounted for in your log here. What did you do?
Your thoughts are certainly welcome. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. I have to say I'm not appalled by this conduct. I am not shocked in any way, shape, or form. It's actually one of the reasons why I've been trying to stay away from this Ferguson situation throughout the week. I've seen so much footage of police violence in my years of hosting this radio show. I've seen so many tear gas grenades thrown in innocent people's houses, babies set aflame by the police, houses burned down to the ground. I mean, I've just seen so much destruction. It was I've tried to stay away from this, honestly, and it's become such a large news story. It can't be ignored at this point. This is probably the most important story. Certainly of the month.
Right, and I just feel like it'd be hard for me, like, even if I was as seasoned as you and had to hear all of these terrible police stories, like, I would still be equally as disgusted now, just because, like, policemen are no longer, held accountable for things. They're more militarized, and they can basically get away with anything.
Yep, sure can. Toll-free number here is 855-450-FREE. When they're shooting tear gas grenades at news crews and putting news cameramen in handcuffs, news reporters in handcuffs, something's screwy.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.